Welcome back to my channel once again. As always, it's your favorite cinematographer here, Grad. Please, if you're new, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And if you're returning, I'll settle for a like, maybe a comment, maybe both. But welcome to term 2. This is, I think, week 2. Yo, it's been really interesting for 2 reasons. One, post has been a lot longer than expected, but also we didn't get a holiday for term 1, so it was kind of audacious. We got an email for term 2 going welcome back, and I'm like, we didn't get to leave. But in any case, 13th of June, Experimental Film Festival at after Johannesburg campus. Pull up, watch our film. It's gonna be amazing. But today, there's no vlog. However, it was just, I don't know, I was just trying to recover energy and just sleep as much as possible because the term's about to start again, which means it's going to be DPP soon, it's going to be RS soon, and all these sorts of crazy things. So I really just wanted to get my energy back, right? So that was the first thing. And then the other thing was, what I wanted to go through is a little bit of color grading, because I think it's been a while since I've actually done some color grading stuff on my channel. But I was going over something that I shot earlier this year. It was something it was a spec ad that I was shooting for Zuzu. Didn't get to finish it, but I still like the shots that I got out of it. So I figured I could always just use them to practice my color grading, and that's what we did. So that's what we're about to check out right now. Also, side note, I'm seeing so much conversation about FX3 versus C50 because the C50 dropped I think late last year or early this year. No, definitely late last year. Early this year, I think. But yeah, I've seen so many chats about that, and maybe I'll give my 2 cents at the end of this. But with that said, let's get into the video.
And Ma said, I have the right to talk for my things. By 8 o'clock, we were already moved to Middlelands. The walls and the floor of the house were rough cement. Everything was awful, and we were very unhappy.
It's about to have guys running at a 4-minute pace on an 8K run.
Okay, so take 2. You guys will not believe this. My phone died and essentially 12 minutes were gone. But in any case, it's all good. I'm gonna just set up my DaVinci Resolve again after it has me calling it DaVinci. Me personally, I call it DaVinci because I assume it's called or named after the actual artist. But in any case, let's get into this. So this is basically footage from something that I shot a few months ago. Not entirely happy with how it came out because it deviated entirely from the treatment that I initially had for it. But I'm not mad at it because there are also a lot of things that I was experimenting with. So I'm definitely going to be shooting it again. But basically the idea behind it was I was just trying to start getting into doing car spec ads. I think that's something that I want to add to my cinematography portfolio, doing car related type of work. So going into this look, I wanted to do something that's very naturalistic. However, my intention was to do it around blue hour, and unfortunately we weren't able to shoot at that time with the time allocated, because also I think I had to come back to school fairly quickly to process my enrollment, and I had to do this within my last week before school starts. But in any case, Really happy with how it came out for the most part. Honestly, no complaints there. I think it was a great step in the right direction, although there are just a few things that I might need to tweak. So I'm gonna try and switch off everything and just go over my color grading workflow. We'll look at a few stills, and yeah, I don't know. You guys will let me know if you're gonna see more content, particularly on the grading side, on its own, right? So let me just see if I can select everything first, and we can look into this look. So first things first, as far as workflow, typically what I do is I do group my layers into one thing. Not my layers, I do group my clips into a group, group them into a group, if I shot them on the same camera, or just if I have clips from cameras that I need to transform the color space to, I group them into one. That way I don't have to add my CST node to every single clip. But moving on, because for the purposes of this, I'll just play around with the footage. We're gonna get into it. So after grading that film, what I realized was, I think for me as a colorist, I've kind of grown a lot more since when I had to grade this, which is unfortunate because it was no more than 2 or 3 months ago. But I think I've acquired a lot more skill, and I think I'm beginning to analyze and approach my color grading a lot more intentionally, particularly with creative looks. So let's get into it. I also wanted to do something that was very earthy with this. I think that was the mood and vibe that I was going for, and hopefully that comes through. And yeah, let's get into it. So first things first, CST in. What I basically did with this was transforming my color space out of log into DaVinci Wide Gamut, and then from there applying a CST out, or color space transformation out, into my DaVinci Wide, well, rather from my DaVinci Wide Gamut into the Rec 709 and Gamut color spaces. However, with this, I will go more in depth on, or rather in the other clip. With this one, we'll mainly just be looking at the grade. And yeah, I'll discuss it further in the other clips. But basically, it's what the final image went for, or looked like. Very clean. I wanted it to feel crisp and cinematic without that sort of clinical digital feel. And I might have gone a little bit overboard with some of the texturizing that I did here, but I'll kind of explain my reasons for it, why, especially when I get into the other clips that I've already graded. But I thought this look was very, 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 very nice. Particularly as I'm experimenting with something of this sort where, you know, especially with cars, you're dealing with the outdoors. It was very important for me to sort of establish the kind of look, vibe, and aesthetic that I want to go for with these type of shoots, or with this type of work. So what I did with this, let me see if I can increase this. I feel like my sound is a little bit too low. I went for something very cool, but still leaning in to the browns and the earthy tones, as well as just changing the hue of my greens a little bit to something a little bit olive in a sense. So let's get into the other clips. I think one clip I really liked was this one. I thought this grade was really nice. I do think I adjusted something by mistake here. Let me see if I can adjust that. I don't like how that happened. Let me see if I can take this down a little bit and bring it closer to what we're going for. Yes, there we go. So this was the overall look that I was essentially going for. I think this one might be a little bit too contrasty. We can fix that just a tad bit. But yeah, I think this was the overall look that I was honestly going for. So in terms of my workflow, this is how it went down. First things first was, let me actually try and disable as much of this as I can, and then we can build into how this look came together. So switching on my color space, first things first was, this was the raw image out of the camera. So my white balance is a little bit off. And basically when I shoot with Sony log, There's obviously that industry standard thing of overexposing the image a little bit. And what I did was, if you use Cine EI, especially if you're shooting log and not the flexible ISO mode, I usually put my EI level at 500 from the base ISO of 800, which helps me increase or overexpose my image by probably about half a stop or so. Max I go is a stop, maybe 1.5 stops, but I rarely go over 1 stop overexposed. And then when I get into my software, in this case being DaVinci, I then bring that contrast back, or I bring my general exposure down. So honestly, I'm still fairly new to this, but some people tend to bring down just the overall exposure. I usually just bring down my shadows and highlights just a little bit, because ultimately that's just what I'm trying to clean up, and more so the shadows. Then I color balance it. This color balancing really annoyed me for a couple of reasons, right? One, my parade looks fairly okay, although I think the red here might be a bit too much, but I'd say it looked fairly balanced. Something changed, because now we also have a lot of blue here in the highlights that's coming in. But we won't get into that. But if I look at my dropper, right, what you'll notice is, in terms of my white value, we're not too far off, I'd say, but I stand to be corrected. So yeah, I don't know, not too happy with the color balancing here. Not bad, not the greatest, but I think I did change quite a bit of things as I was trying to record this video. But in any case, I tend to work a little bit in reverse. So once I've kind of created or done the technical side of things, I like to create the look or my colors. So this is what I went for, and then I just start building off of it. So after getting the color that I wanted, what I then do is go into my mid detail and I switch it on. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but what the mid detail does is just basically get rid of that digital sharpness. I don't like it, or at least that's not the mood or goal that I was going for. And then added our glow. Sometimes I have it on, sometimes I have it off. And then I make use of a radial blur. So I don't know if you guys can see these edges here, but it just kind of makes it look like the lens had so much character. And after that, sometimes I also add the Gaussian blur just to kind of blur things out a little bit more. In some cases, it might be a bit too strong, and in others, it works perfectly fine. But yeah, that's just me. And then once I'm happy with what I have, both these blurs, I tend to put them inside of a power window, so much like this, so that it only affects the sides or the parts of the image outside of her, so that she's not sort of affected by that effect. But I do have a problem with applying them a little bit too strong. You guys will let me know. So once I have that down, the general look and aesthetic, this is very clean, it's very sharp, but not too sharp. This is where I start to relight it. So in terms of relighting, I looked at where my sources of light were, and then I added a shadow this side just to kind of give the image a bit of a more 3D feel, and also just increase the contrast. And then a general power window here, or at least an eclipse power window. As you can see, it's affecting these parts of the image, so that it helps guide the viewer's eye or your eye more towards my talent here on camera. So this is how it looks without my relighting. I'm going to switch it on and off. Without the relighting, with the relighting, notice how it helps you really focus on her eye. I thought that was really cool. And then the other thing that I also took note of was my skin and my earthy tones. While I liked the little desat that I added to this, I still wanted to make them a bit more punchy. You know, they seemed a little bit too dull for my liking, but I mean, that's not the point. The point is, you know, does the mood and feel come across? And you guys will be the judge of that. But I then use a qualifier to select her skin, and then I added a little bit more warmth. So I increased the color temperature just a little bit, and a little bit more saturation, because I felt like this was a bit too dull. I still wanted to get a sense of her skin and not make it feel like a sad occasion. While we are going earthy, I still wanted it to feel quite vibrant. So I thought making the browns and the earth tones a bit more punchy with the green contrasting that would come across really well. I think the other thing that I wanted to do just in general as a grader and just honing in my skill is working with color contrast and making a lot of harmony or creating harmony. So one thing that I did learn is usually I'm tempted to make my shadows and midtones one thing or one type of or rather one color, and then my highlights be the contrasting one. But in this case, my highlights and midtones were warm and then my shadows were a lot cooler. And the thing that I'm realizing as I start to grade more and more and more is sometimes when you add certain adjustments, you can't really see them. I mean, only me as a grader, I'd know that I added it, but what it does to the image, even though you wouldn't be able to tell that it's actually applied there, is absolutely insane. Like you would not think I added blue to the shadows, and that just makes things very interesting. I don't know if it's gonna help me in my analysis of looks when I try to recreate them, but if I looked at this image as a reference, I genuinely would not be able to tell that, you know, the shadows are cooler. You know, I'm just more focused on the greens and browns, but hopefully that's something that I sort of grow into in my skill here. So after that, I basically then just applied a qualifier on her hat to basically just help me bring down the highlights. I felt like her hat was a bit too overexposed, so I used a qualifier to select it and then brought down the highlights in that region. And then coming down to still within my look nodes, I just wanted to cool down the image a little bit or just increase the contrast, because what you can see is now you get a sense of that teal contrasting this brown or this orange that we have in our highlights and midtones. I think it looks really amazing. You guys will let me know what you think, but I really like this as a final image. Let me know if you guys would be down to have me do more color grading content and if you enjoyed this part. But yeah, this was a really fun project to work on. I think it's one of those things that really help you develop more, especially with me having like this new avenue of color grading. I think this came in really well. But yeah, so if you guys like this part of the video, let me know. And yeah,